Well, I'll yell. Welcome to the November meeting of the Dallas chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. Happy to have everybody here. To get started, if you would please join me and stand and join me in the pledge to the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And for the Texas flag, Jerry Pinkerton.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
And Bill Richardson, would you please lead us in the affirmation of the SAR?
We descendants of the heroes of the American Revolution, who by their sacrifices established the United States of America,
Reaffirm our faith in the principles of liberty and our constitutional republic, and solemnly pledge ourselves to defend them against every foe. And in good voice this morning, Mr. Morton, would you lead us?
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring.
While still standing, could I have Chancellor Tracy Pounders give us the invocation?
Shall we pray? Beloved Father, thank you for the blessings you have given us, this beautiful country, our good lives in this good country. Look over us today as we honor our forefathers and our foremothers, whose hard work and the blood they shed laid the foundation for this nation and all the privileges, rights, and blessings that we enjoy today. Help us be inspired to continue their good work by keeping this country strong. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. Good group this morning. Happy to have a number of guests. I'm going to start on this side of the room, if I will. In addition to our State Chancellor, Tracy Pounders, and our Inland Registrar, Jerry Brown, Jerry Pinkerton, would you introduce some of your friends?
I have two soon-to-be new members. They just got their applications filed with Jerry Brown. This is J.D. Martin and Brandon Martin. And this gentleman will be inducted a little later, so we'll get his details.
Gentlemen, welcome. The next table, I think, Jerry, there may be a guest at your table.
Sure. My name is Michael Davis, and I just got my postcard from National, so living in Las Colinas, I'm trying to hit all the different members before all the packet and everything. So.
Fantastic. Love to get that postcard, right?
Yep.
That's great. Congratulations. There you go. Great. Thank you. Tracy does a little bit of everything. By the way, a lot of people don't know this, but Tracy actually is the outgoing chancellor for the state, if I'm correct, and will be the incoming secretary. Well, I had a feeling you'll probably be nominated, but there's a good chance that he could be our next secretary of the State Association. So hats off to you for continued service. Around the room, trying to see if we have any new guests. Well, Mark, would you please?
Yes, I have my mother here, Bradley Sue Howard.
As close to a member as we can have, Bradley Sue. Thank you very much. We have a good guest that's visiting us for the second time today. Jack Carpenter is sitting at this table up here.
Now, don't misunderstand this. Jack has to leave this morning because he's making a public appearance and a public speech. He's going to talk with some people about how to handle wealth management for autism, and he has some specific information about that in his own family, himself, and his children. So we're very, very happy to have you as a guest again, and I have a good feeling from what he's told me, he may become a member of this chapter. So it's not in ink and paper yet, but Jack, we're looking forward to having you here. Did I miss anybody in the audience? Okay. Well, today we're going to have kind of a rare situation for our chapter, and it's kind of getting back to the roots, and this is what's really good about it. And quite frankly, this was kind of at the suggestion of one of our speakers today, Mike Pedritas, because he said you need to have chapter people involved. Having outside speakers and presenters is always good because it gives you a little bit of a flair and a flavor for what's out there. But to talk about what you as a member and what you know as a member and your patriot, that's really important. And so we're going to have two presentations today by two members. The first, Brent Harshman, who's a brand new member. He's been with us a couple months now. And he's the one that unfortunately had to move in next to Jerry Pinkerton, and we're sorry about that, but those things happen. But he has some comments on our Americanism speech that he'd like to give, and it concerns his father, who was detained, held in a German World War II POW camp. And there are some great comments that his father wrote down. Brent, we'd like to have you share those.
Thanks, Tom, and also Mark, for this chance to give the Americanism segment. We're coming up on Veterans Day, of course, Monday, and then also next month is the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, the first day being December 16th, 1944. A lot of you may have family ties to that, either through a loved one who fought in it, didn't come back from it, or did survive, or was a POW like my father. His name was Ray Harshman. I have an interesting book here that I'm going to read a few passages from. The book was not written by my father. It was written by the company clerk who had a lot of records of this particular unit, which was the 168th Engineer Combat Battalion. They were active in World War II from formation in May of 1943 through November of 1945. And many of the men in this group were from New England. My father was not. He was from Michigan. But the book is interesting, and the author contacted as many of the members as he could to get their personal comments. So I start off with just a few things that Mr. Dean Jewett wrote about this. And this unit also did not go through D-Day. They did not land on the beaches on D-Day. They came through there a little bit later. So Mr. Jewett starts out with, December 16th started for us like any other day, except that later in the day we received word of the ambush encountered by some of our men who apparently were the first to experience the forthcoming assault. And I'm going to read the names of these men who we should honor, even though many of them are deceased. A weapons carrier driven by Horace Sanford of Maine with 3 other men from Company B. Ray Harshman in front with the driver, Russ Belanger and Dan Okarma riding in the back, was sent on a mission to retrieve some material previously located by our recon. The truck ran into an ambush. Dan was killed and the other 3 taken prisoner. That's right, I had to skip around here in the book. The details he said he wanted to give after Mr. Sanford stopped the truck and dove into the ditch. Ray Harshman also bailed out and landed in the ditch. The 2 in the back, Russ and Dan, since the sides were closed, had no idea of what was happening, but the bullets tore through the canvas and mortally wounded Mr. O'Karma. Russ had a bullet hole in his canteen and some of his clothing, but was unharmed otherwise. So this is how they became prisoners. And then at this point, later in my dad's life, he wrote down the details of this. I never heard about this when I was a kid, but I found it interesting. It's just sort of like a piece of history that is escaping us through this generation passing. I hope you find this interesting. After undergoing small arms as well as artillery fire from our own troops most of the first day of our capture, Russ, Horace, and I were marched under the cover of twilight to the rear of the German lines. There were probably 15 members of the 106th Division who had been captured also, accompanying us in helping the wounded Germans to a place of refuge under a railroad viaduct. When we arrived, we were ordered to carry bales of hay and straw from a nearby barn to cover first the wounded who had been accumulated at that point, and later as our only source of warmth during that cold December night. I doubt if any of us slept during those uncertain hours, which were made even less restful by the continuing moaning of the German wounded. The next morning we were encouraged as we were to be assembled and marched farther into Germany with no sense of retaliation from our captors. Finally arriving in Prüm, we spent our second night there. To most of us, it was kind of a grim experience to be sheltered in a church building with most of the roof blown off, but we made the best of it as we crawled under the benches to get some much-needed sleep. Upon awakening, we heard rumors that we might be fed that morning for the first time since our capture. The huge container of soup was soon brought forth, but unfortunately with not a semblance of utensils or bowls from which to eat. I don't recall how the others received their share of the mixture, but since I was lucky enough to still have my steel helmet with me, and Russ only had his wool liner on, we dry scrubbed what appeared to be laundry residue from the inside of my helmet and lined up to receive a double portion of the soup. The fact that I had last washed my socks in the helmet detracted not one bit from our enjoyment of our first meal as POWs. Events in the passage of time following this get a little blurred, but we did spend another day or so at a gathering point, which this time was an enclosed building with a roof where we were again fed bread and a hot beverage such as ersatz coffee. When we left that spot, our guards marched us at a rather rapid pace, forcing us to run at times, which made us concerned for the less physically fit of our number. It was at this time that the seriousness of our capture began to dawn on us when we saw the long lines of other American POWs being brought to the area we had just left. We knew now we definitely wouldn't be home for Christmas. Finally, we arrived at Stalag 12 near Limburg, where the NCOs and privates were separated and housed separately. It was explained to us that this was a transient camp from which we would soon be moved to a more permanent location. We had been here but a day or two when the infamous bombing of our camp by the English Lancaster bombers was made during the evening hours. We were locked in our large bedless barracks, so with the concussions of the bombs shattering the windows and our inability to seek other shelters, we really wondered if this was going to be it. Skipping down, soon it was rumored we would be moved to another location by train and that each of us would be afforded the luxury of a Red Cross food parcel while we were in transit. When we were lined up and loaded into the boxcars without the food parcels being issued, we weren't too concerned. But after we had spent a day and a night in the overcrowded cars without food, we knew it was going to be an unpleasant journey. As I recall, we were given some food once or twice during our 3-day trip to the interior of Germany, but that discomfiture paled beside the overcrowding to the extent that we all could not lie down to sleep at the same time. Additionally, our rolling prisons were made even less habitable by the total sanitary facilities consisting of 2 or 3 12-quart pails, which usually overflowed before we were able to dump them. The possibility of being bombed and strafed by our own aircraft was also a source of concern from time to time. By now, we had become accustomed to being cold most of the time, although many still had some winter GI clothing. Let's see. Finally, we arrived at Stalag 3A south of Berlin near Luckenwald and were welcomed through the fence by some British counterparts. Skipping on down. Dysentery was rampant from time to time, but luckily was controllable, so we didn't lose anyone from it. We were even afforded the luxury of sick call once or twice a week, which I made fairly regularly because of my frozen toes. Occasionally, our guards tried to unsettle me by motioning scissor-like with their fingers as if my unhealing toes were going to be amputated. The most amusing yet irritating part of the sick call was the little German doctor always giving his Heil Hitler salute as he approached us, waiting on the stairway. One cold day after we'd been at the camp for a few weeks, we were marched over to a building which we had never seen before. Once inside, we were told to disrobe, then we were taken into a cavernous room where spray-like fixtures extended from the walls. While we waited for further directions, some of us contemplated the possibility of this being a gas chamber. We were relieved to see kerosene being brought in with which to coat our bodies to eliminate any body lice we might have. The wall fixtures were shower heads of a sort with a little soap and lots of cold water so we could remove most of the kerosene before dressing and returning to our barracks. Skipping on down. There's a lot of details about just food they ate, and this is coming closer to the end. When we came in, when the sergeant in charge of the prison compound came in, this was a German, to tell us the Russian army was approaching, this is months later, and that he and the other guards, they were all World War I vintage, were going to leave, and we could go with them if we wanted to. We thanked him, but headed for the crude bomb shelters present in our area. We had heard small arms fire earlier, but had thought nothing unusual about it. We should have realized the end was nearing, as we could see our fighter planes operating in the distance at times, and the German hospital trains seemed to be shuttling back and forth with no permanent destination available to them. At any rate, we were glad to see the Russian recon column the next morning. They gave their POWs weapons immediately, told our group to head west toward our lines, but told me and another GI of Polish descent from Buffalo, New York, to go with them, ostensibly because of my frozen feet, which had still not healed. The Russian column cruised over the countryside, liberating work camps containing many nationalities and picking up a few older uniformed Germans who were probably home guards. Some were summarily shot as if they were animals, while we saw some cruelly disposed of days later. My friend and fellow prisoner were even asked if we'd like to help. One night, the Germans made a counterattack on the little town we were in, and both of us thought we might still become victims of German military action. As days went by, the Russians would never reply to our questions about when they were going to take us to the American lines. I became concerned and pleaded with my friend from Buffalo to walk out of the camp since we were not guarded. He finally agreed, but that day happened to be May 1st. That was May 1st, 1945, and everyone was restricted to quarters because of May Day, being a big Russian celebration, communist. We enjoyed, to some extent, getting acquainted with our Russian friends and stayed particularly close to the cook's crew. They told us stories of the hardships in Russia due to the long war and the German invasion. Some of the Russians had been in the army for 9 years and fighting for 6 years. We were relatively free to do as we pleased, so I always tried to keep track of our location in regard to the Elbe River, which we had heard where the U.S. Army was. One morning, about May 3rd or 4th, we were told that our next move was going to be a long one down to southern Germany. The Russians still wouldn't tell us about returning us to the lines, so we once again decided to try to walk away. This time we were successful in getting out to a main road where Russian vehicles were streaming southwest towards the Elbe River, which I knew to be 15 miles away or less. The Russian trucks were pleased to give us a lift, so we were soon across the Elbe River at Targau. We found our troops at that point and only then realized how good-looking those enlisted GI uniforms were. And then the epilogue of the little write-up, it says, we understood all free exchange of personnel across the Elbe River between our forces and the Russians was halted the day following our crossing, the beginning of the Iron Curtain. The day hostilities formally ended, May 8th, my friend and I were in a displaced persons camp along with many other nationalities, the main ones I recall being natives of India. And then the author of the book, this is his note on this little passage. Those of us who went from civilian life to Fort Devens, that was up in Maryland, I believe, or no, Massachusetts, and then into one outfit where we stayed all during the war, can appreciate Ray's journey through the military. During his entire military service, he was either in basic training, in a hospital, waiting for a ship, on board a ship, at a replacement depot, a prisoner of war, except for 4 to 6 months he was with the one at 168th. So that's the story of my father, Ray Harshman.
Thank you. And your father, at the end of the war,
Made it home,
yes?
reunited with his wife, my mother, Catherine, and I was born 1948. He lived a full and happy life and passed away in 2010 at age 92. So,
And we thank him for his service, particularly on Monday, and we'll hear more about that. Well, thank you. I appreciate you making a contribution. Before you go, it is our ceremony here that we honor the people that speak to us.
Thank
so
you.
we'd like to give you a
Great.
certificate of participation.
thanks very much.
Thanks, my friend.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Very poignant knowing what's coming up next week, huh? All right, now, some years ago when I first started attending these meetings, one of the first people I met was the gentleman from actually the up east, as they call it. Mike Pedritas comes to us by way of Massachusetts and a few other states up that way. But we've never held it against you. As he told us, you know, he got to Texas as quick as he could, so that's good. Mike, as you know, is a former chapter president. He was in the president when I first got to the chapter, and has been a great advocate of talking about what we did in the revolution, what we know about the revolution, what we don't know about the revolution, and some of the questions or mysteries of the revolution. He's here this morning to talk to us about one of the mysteries or misconceptions that took place in the Revolutionary War. And that is, quote unquote, what we call the Battle of Bunker Hill. He tells me there's a different story. So, Mike, it's yours.
Morning. Morning, Michael.
I'm getting the computer warmed up. I wasn't a POW, but to be a fighter pilot, you had to go through POW training. It was about a 3-week course out in Spokane, and 2 words that the enemy uses to brainwash you and get you on their side: sleep deprivation. When you're walking around as a zombie for over 2 days without sleep, you start bending towards their ways. So, sleep deprivation. More in my other book that I wrote, Fighter Pilot Follies. I think we may need to dim the lights just a touch more, if we could. Due to technology, the black one didn't work, but Tom came through on the lighter one. Can anybody see that? Sort of. It's a big screen with a photo on it. So the short version of Bunker Hill is that Nixon resigned in '74. The British were so upset that they sent ships to conquer Charlestown. All right, so now that I got your attention, let's talk about Bunker Hill. I'm sorry for the lighting, so is there anybody that cannot see it? Or we got tables up here if you want to come closer. So what happened? Let's talk about Boston, the Boston area. Bunker Hill, or Breeds Hill, happened on June 17th. Prior to that, on the 18th of April, 75, hardly a man is now alive. We had the Battle of Lexington and Concord. So this is the monument going up to what's now Bunker Hill in Charlestown. And let's take a look at the Boston area. Sometimes it goes too fast and sometimes it goes too slow. So here's the Boston area. Let me try to point out. So Boston is right here. At that time, it was in a peninsula. This is the Back Bay. Who's from Boston? Who's been up to Boston? A few, maybe half. The Back Bay has been filled in. So Copley Square, if you're familiar with that area, that's right here in this body of water. Boston is right here. Charlestown is right here just across. This is the Charles River, which is now MIT and Harvard are over in this area. So we have Lexington and Concord up here to the upper left on the screen, and Cambridge is where the Colonials had their headquarters. On the south of Boston is Roxbury, which is not a nice area to travel through by night these days. So that's also an area that the British were concerned about. So what the British did in the short version is they were preparing to launch on the eastern side of Charlestown right here, and also send in troops from Roxbury to south through Boston, where there was a battery of cannons on the north end where the Old North Church is in this area. Sometimes you can just tap the screen and it works. And so there are 3 hills. Where the battle happened is Breeds Hill here. Bunker Hill is to the top left, and there's also Moulton Hill on Charlestown to the top right. Again, here's the Charles River in this area, and then you have the beachhead where the British landed their ships and their troops. So on June 16th, the day before Bunker Hill, the Colonials got wind that the British were about to start an invasion, if you will, on Cambridge and into Roxbury. And so on the night of the 16th, the day before the battle, they prepared battlements, redoubts, fortified walls, if you will, which were actually shorter than the Alamo in San Antonio, so they really weren't that tall of a wall. But they started these fortifications on the night of the 16th. Now, Bunker Hill itself was a great trading area and very important for commerce. You can see here from the advertisement that they are sending ships all the way to San Francisco. So it's a major port area, and the British are not keen on letting it fall into colonial hands. Let's talk about some of the major players before we get into the battle itself. Just before the monument is a statue of William Prescott. So we have several players here that were involved in the 7-Year War, the French and Indian War, so they're battle hardened. Now, Major General Prescott was commissioned as a Major General, but he was a doctor in the Freemasons. The Freemason Society was established in England around the year 1717. And Colonel Prescott, I'm sorry, I get that mixed up with Dr. Warren. So this is a statue of Prescott. I'll get into Dr. Warren here in a second. Prescott was a colonel and a battle-hardened soldier involved in the 7-Year War, and he led about 1,700 men in the center of Breeds Hill, which was that hill there to the south. Here's a better statue today, right in front of the monument of Colonel Prescott. Colonel Prescott was concerned about this is really hard to see, I apologize. He was really concerned about the British possibility of advance, and back in May, he had sent, about a month prior, he had sent this order to General Artemus Ward, who was in charge of the garrison there at Cambridge, that we need better reinforcements at Breeds Hill. So already a month prior, a month after Concord and Lexington battle, but a month prior to Bunker Hill, the Colonials were already worrying about a British advance on the Breeds Hill in Charlestown. John Stark, in my opinion, he's the hero of the war. John Stark was involved also in the French and Indian War. He manned the line of defenses on the north side of Breeds Hill and withstood all three advances of the British. He ended up dying at an old age in his early 90s, but he was also part of Rogers Rangers. Everybody heard of Rogers Rangers? So a battle-hardened soldier, and I'm sure he earned many Purple Hearts, but he's one of the key players in this war, or this battle also. Here's a statue inside the visitor center at Bunker Hill of Dr. Warren. So it's this fellow I confused earlier. So it's Major General Warren, and during the battle, in a yield to the military expertise of Colonel Prescott, he agreed to fight in the battle as a private. So he threw away his two-star Major General rank, took on the role of private, and fought under Colonel Prescott. And it's because of Major General Warren's relationship with the Freemasons that I mentioned earlier that the Freemasons erected the first monument at Bunker Hill, which stood for about until the 1830s, until they built the present-day monument. On the British side, we got Major General Clinton, who thinks Cornwallis was the lead general for the Brits for all of North America. Actually, it's this fellow here. General Clinton was in charge of the Boston area, and later became, in the early 1780s, became in charge of all of North American British forces. Many British attributed the loss of the war to General Clinton, but so Cornwallis was more involved in the southern part of the colonies during the Revolutionary War. But General Clinton is leading the Navy ships on the attack on Charlestown. Here's a little bit on here. Again, I apologize for the lack of clarity. But the thing about General Clinton is that he was a member of Parliament and also a military officer, so he was well regarded. In today's Parliament, he would be a Lord. He wouldn't be a member of the House of Commons, he'd be a member of the House of the Lords. So well regarded from the British perspective. Now let's talk about the battle itself. In one of the famous paintings, the fellow in white here is Dr. Warren, or Major General Warren, who again agreed to fight as a private. And he dies early on. Because of his distinguished career, he was commissioned as a Major General, but again had no real fighting experience compared to Colonel Prescott or Colonel Stark. So he was one of the first ones to go, but because of his status in society, they made a nice painting about him. Let's talk about where everybody is. So this is Breeds Hill. Bunker Hill is up in the upper left, and again, Moulton Hill is over here. The British had 3 ships. The Falcon had 12 cannons. It was a sloop. There's a battery here on the north end of Boston, and then the British had other ships here. And again, they're trying to land reinforcements. This is a daytime battle. We don't fight at night like the Navy SEALs do today. So Colonel Stark that I mentioned earlier is up on this line of defenses here with about 400 men. Breeds Hill here is under Colonel Prescott with about 1,700 men. There's a redoubt, which is like an earthen berm, if you will. There's a nice redoubt. If you ever go to Valley Forge, they got a really preserved one there. But there's a redoubt here, and then to the south, they have other defenses with the Colonials. But again, the fortifications are not strong. It's not a 100-foot high cliff that they're trying to use as a defense or a wall. These are more like farm field walls that they're trying to use just to prevent or slow down the advance of the British. There's a narrow peninsula that goes over from Charlestown over to Cambridge, where again, there were more American or colonial forces there, and one of the drawbacks of the battle was that the General Artemus Ward, who was in charge of all the colonials in Cambridge, was slow and even didn't have the inclination to send reinforcements across there. Had he done so, he might have left Cambridge exposed. They might have won Bunker Hill, but they may have left Cambridge exposed to the British onslaught, which is coming around from Roxbury more to the south. So these are the line of defenses. The key takeaway of the battle is that the British advanced not just once, but 3 times, which is unheard of prior to these type of engagements. The other takeaway is that the colonials persevered in killing more British than they lost. So they proved that they could fight the world's best army and have, well, if you want to call it a success by numbers, that they could achieve at least good results. So let's get into some detail about the battle. Before I do that, I want to talk about the face of the soldier. Who has heard of Crispus Attucks and the Boston Massacre? So that was in 1770. Crispus Attucks was a black former slave who was killed. And what this article shows here, it's also in the Visitor Center at Bunker Hill, is that there were many Indians and former slaves, black slaves, who were part of the Continental Army, were up in New England militia at least, who were helping to fight the war. So the face was not just Caucasian, it was a mix of folks. These guys were also farmers, and more importantly, they were good hunters. And so the British suffered most of their losses via snipers that were in the trees in Charlestown, on just the outskirts of Breed's Hill. So while the British were setting Charlestown aflame with their cannon fire from the ships, the snipers were picking off the officers. Again, it wasn't, if you've seen the Mel Gibson Patriot movie, it wasn't gentlemanly to start shooting officers. But the farmers, they could care less, right? They just see the red coats, and they're shooting. So they're not really big on to distinguish who's an officer and who's eligible for shooting. Abigail Adams, who's Abigail Adams? Future President John Adams' wife. She wrote a piece about the battle, which I can enlarge here. And basically she said that this high ground of Breed's Hill bound the American colonies to the cause of independence. An open field once located here commanded the entire area. On the night of June 16, 1775, 2 months after the fighting at Lexington and Concord, 1,200 colonial militiamen quickly built a small earthen fort. As dawn broke on June 17th, the fort stood in clear view of the British Army in Boston. British cannon from the ship and land opened fire, some 2,200, so they had 1,000 more British soldiers than the colonials did. Some 2,200 British soldiers crossed the Charles River and assaulted the hill. After several bloody attacks, the British troops overran the colonists. The British forces won this ground, but it cost nearly half of their men. The other key takeaway, and this was a factor throughout the Revolutionary War, is lack of ammunition. So there were 3 charges, 3 attacks, and we'll talk here later that the third attack was mostly British bayonets and colonials throwing rocks and sticks. They ran out of ammunition. So we went back to a Stone Age. In this one here, and again, the quality is not the best. So the Falcon ship that the British command is over here, and it's just laying down cannon fire. Colonel Stark's up at this line of defenses. Colonel Prescott's down here. 400 men up north, 700 men here with Colonel Prescott, and they're taking the brunt of the attack on the north side. There's, again, another earthen redoubt, if you will, over here on the south with the colonials. And there's also a Copp's Hill on the north end of Boston by the Old North Church. They're also firing cannons across the Charles River into here. So Charlestown is right here. If anybody's visited the Constitution, then it's in this area here, and that's set ablaze. It's on fire. So that was the first attack, and again, that was just after dawn. The colonials fired back with cannon and to try to stop the British ships from landing reinforcements on the shore, because they didn't have that many there to begin with. Here's what they have to say inside the visitor center. The hill teemed with troops. The attack to the untrained eyes, the British in the morning's light on June 17th revealed the Patriot troops and fortifications. Exhausted from building the defenses all night, the Patriot soldiers had little or no food or water, scant ammunition, and faced a brutally hot day. The British ships began firing cannons, although most cannonballs fell short. The dramatic noise of the nearly day-long bombardment intimidated the inexperienced troops, as did the first grim fatality, the beheading of Private Asa Bullard by a cannonball. As barges of British forces landed on the Charlestown Peninsula, the Patriots continued to fortify their defenses, especially at their exposed left flank. By mid-afternoon, the Patriot forces had secured positions and occupied the town as residents had withdrawn. The deployed British troops, including the Marines and artillery, numbered 2,500. Abigail Adams had said 2,200 earlier. They confronted the Patriot forces of about 3,500. Only a portion of these Patriot troops fought in the front lines. Others comprised reserves or they held back on the actual Bunker Hill, partly due to the widespread confusion among the Patriots enlisted and officers. And then the article continues, balls flew like hailstones and cannons roared like thunder. The British began their assault on the hill and on the Mystic River beach, that's on the south side of Charlestown. With full packs and oppressive heat, they advanced across the irregular terrain unsuited to the typical British tactics of volley firing and frontal assault. In the first two British assaults, the Patriots, shooting from cover, killed and wounded scores of British soldiers and deliberately fired upon many officers to create chaos. Ordered not to shoot until they could see the whites of their eyes, as legend has it, the rebels fired at close range, tearing gaps in the British ranks and driving back those left standing. Prior to the first assault, snipers had been positioned in the town of Charlestown, and they fired upon the British forces. In response, the British set fire to the town. From the rooftops of Boston and nearby towns, Patriots, Loyalists, and British forces watched Charlestown burn to the ground. And here's an artist's rendition. Charlestown to the right side of the screen, and Boston to the left, with the Charles River there in the middle. So the second attack, I'm not sure if you can see the arrows, but they did a major assault where Colonel Prescott had on the wall here, and they were forced to retreat to the redoubt. And again, the British ships, they had snuck one around the side here, so this is the Mystic River Beach. If you walk from across the Charles River, take this causeway, it's now a bridge, you can go over to MIT, which didn't exist back then. And again, you got the North Battery here from near the Old North Church in Boston, firing also into Charlestown. So the brunt of the attack was more on the middle part of Breed's Hill. Again, Bunker Hill is to the top left. And so there were troops there at Bunker Hill that either for lack of command or fear that if they committed the troops at Bunker Hill, they would now not have any protection on the peninsula to Cambridge, where the colonial headquarters were. They kept a lot of troops at Bunker Hill and didn't use them for the fighting going on at Breed's Hill. The story continues, despite the extraordinary losses, the disciplined British troops regrouped after their retreats and advanced a third time, which was uncommon as far as tactics go in those days. At this point, the Patriot ammunition was very low, with many soldiers resorting to hurling rocks and firing nails as ammunition at the end. Colonel Prescott later said that with enough ammunition for one more round, the Patriots might have prevailed. The British carried and used bayonets. The colonials did not. When the British finally breached the defenses, vicious hand-to-hand fighting using the bayonets was favored by the British, and the Patriots were forced to retreat. Amid the chaos, the Patriots continued fighting and managed to remove most of the wounded from the field. And here's an artist's rendition of the British advancing, again wearing the red coats. So the final attack on Breed's Hill, and just to give a bit on elevation, so Bunker Hill is the tallest one on the upper left. It's 110 feet above sea level. Breed's Hill is 62 feet above sea level, and Moulton's Hill on the upper right is just 35 feet above sea level. So the main attack here, the British had landed reinforcements from the ships at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the beaches here, and they advanced up to Breed's Hill. And then they had a small one that went around north of Moulton's Hill and attacked Colonel Stark's defenses there to the north of Breed's Hill. But because of the main attack here, the Colonials were forced to flee towards Bunker Hill. And again, what they didn't want is the British to capture the road at the top left going towards Cambridge and their headquarters. And that's where General Artemus Ward was. Now, Artemus Ward, just to read about him, he was a farmer, politician, and volunteer soldier. He directed military operations for the Battle of Bunker Hill, but he was at Cambridge, so he was a behind-the-lines general instead of being at the front. He was more of a Omar Bradley rather than a General Patton, so to speak. Following the fighting at Lexington and Concord, Ward was given command of the militia from Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. During the fighting on June 17th, fearing for the safety of Cambridge and for his forces, Ward was slow to commit his soldiers and released regiments piecemeal by piecemeal to the battle. Subsequently, Ward regained command of the Patriot forces until the arrival of General George Washington, who thereafter commanded. But so some point the finger at General Ward for delaying sending in reinforcements. Then it was a catch-22. If you let too many soldiers go, then they may have left Cambridge undefended. The other player here is General Israel Putnam, who helped lead the retreat so that not all the Colonials died in the Battle of Bunker Hill. So Brigadier General Israel Putnam of the Connecticut Militia, ironically, since I still fly for a living, Putnam is a prominent waypoint to fly over on your arrival into Boston. It's at the on the Connecticut-Massachusetts border, so they named it after him. He was a legendary woodsman and fighter, arrived as a key officer during the battle. He was an experienced soldier named Old Put, and he was impetuous in nature and was among the officers who urged aggressive action against the British. And again, he led the retreat back to Cambridge. Here's the current, or the flag. So it's a blue background, red cross, and an evergreen tree, which are prominent in New England. And I think one of us carried that at the Providence School for our April meeting. There's a stone, a memorial outside of the Bunker Hill Memorial, and it reads Massachusetts Gate. Colonel William Prescott of Massachusetts led the colonial forces here on Breed's Hill. His commanding figure and strong will inspired the farmer soldiers to the greatness of the day. Dr. Joseph Warren, commissioned as a major general, elected to serve Prescott as a private in the battle. Dr. Warren, an early leader of the revolution, was killed in the battlefield in the waning moments of the conflict. So the battle was celebrated by parades after the Revolutionary War was over on an almost annual basis, but it's sporadic. And it wasn't until the 1830s that Daniel Webster and some other congressmen in the area, Daniel Webster being from New Hampshire, helped get funds and start building what's now today's Bunker Hill Monument. And again, it was before the Washington Monument was built, but a similar design. It's actually a feat of engineering for those days because of the pulleys and technology that was needed to keep the column vertical and not leaning. So it started in 1830, almost fully developed in 1837, and finally complete with a nice parade and opening ceremony in the year 1843. Benjamin Franklin had a good quote about this battle, as it was really the first military battle in the Revolutionary War. And Benjamin Franklin said, "The British Army was one of the most powerful military forces of the day. Their leaders were career officers. The troops were regularly trained and were well equipped, yet the enlisted ranks were often filled with soldiers recruited against their will. Poor and unemployed men, sometimes taken right from jail." John Waller, who was the first lieutenant in the British Army, wrote, "Nothing could be more shocking than the carnage that followed the storming of this work. We tumbled over the dead to get at the living." Nathaniel Greene, who was a brigadier general for the Colonials in Rhode Island, said after the Battle of Bunker Hill that, "I wish we could sell them another hill at the same price," meaning with the heavy British losses, if we could do that again, the war might have been over quicker. And my daughter thought the tower was out of whack, so she decided to put her hand up and straighten it out a bit, much like the folks do at the Tower of Pisa. Outside of the park, there's a plaque that says, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." So who's heard of that expression? So that's very common. It came out of Bunker Hill, and it was attributed towards Colonel Prescott. And the plaque reads, "The Battle of Bunker Hill, fought here on Breed's Hill, June 17, 1775, was the first major military confrontation of the Revolutionary War. Although the British won the battle at a terrible cost, it was a great moral victory for the patriots who paved the way that they could and would stand up against the British regulars. The monument is made of Quincy granite." Quincy is a suburb of Boston to the south. Between 1825 and 1843, granite was brought from Quincy up to Charlestown, where it stands today as a memorial to the courage, purpose, and sacrifice of those patriots who in 1775 made actions here and rallied the Colonials and prompted General George Washington to declare, "The liberties of our country are safe." Any questions? Yes, sir.
Curious, how much longer after the Battle of Breed's Hill was it that Washington bombarded the harbor ships and they disappeared from Massachusetts for the rest of the war?
I think Washington arrived in the fall. Is anybody clear on the timeline?
The answer is yes.
Yeah. So I think it was a few more months went by till the fall when Washington arrived, but it wasn't immediate. But that's true, the ships, yeah. So the Battle of New England was basically forfeited to, because I think the British ships went down to New York, as New York is the next front.
That's exactly where they went.
Yeah, and that's an interesting story too, topic for another time. So the bottom line people ask, why is it not called the Battle of Breed's Hill? And it's just because Bunker Hill was the tallest hill in Charlestown. The Breed's Hill is about half the height above sea level as Bunker Hill.
And the mystery is, if you go to see it today, which hill is the monument on?
Je ne sais pas in French, I don't know.
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
is it on Bunker Hill or is it on Breed's Hill where they erected the monument?
To me, it's on Bunker Hill. Yeah, because that is the tallest peak there on Charlestown.
Yeah.
No. Very good. Thank you for your, oh, yes, sir, Jerry.
Went over it quickly, but a lot of people don't recognize one of the reasons George Washington survived is in fact the British were gentlemen and didn't shoot at officers.
Correct. So they honored the rules of war, and well, we didn't read that book quite yet.
That's exactly right.
Any other questions? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Well, Mike, thank you. It's been some long time coming because I know you have a number of talks to make. I'm sure we'll see you again. But this is exactly what we're looking for, is participation from our own membership, contributions about the Revolutionary War, and I thank you for that. For that, obviously, a couple customs. You've given them before. I'm going to give this to you as a certificate of appreciation for what you did this morning.
Thank you, sir.
And yeah, well, I'll take it. Do it all at once. And I did have a bell. We've done this for years, and we're going to do it again. Perfect. I love the
Very good.
music too.
Thank you.
Thank you again, my friend. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you. Remember, no shave November.
Is an interesting sidebar to what he talked about this morning. I recommend something, I don't do this very often because I'm not a vociferous reader like some people are, but in one of the drawings early on in my participation with the chapter, I won a book, or I won a chance at a book, and I picked up a book called Founding Mothers. Now, it's a paperback. It's probably out of print, but it's written by Cokie Roberts, who just recently passed away. And it is an in-depth discussion and outline of all of the women that played dramatic roles in the Revolution, their part in it, where they were, and it was all the way from Boston, Mass, all the way down to South Carolina. But in it, what you talked about, the Abigail Adams talking about Bunker Hill, it's in that book. So it struck home with me. It's a good read. I recommend it. Okay. Tom Whitelock said that I should say something about my recent travels. I'm not going to spend time on that because I could talk vociferously forever about going to Europe, and it was a great fun. I will say this. I wore my SAR button proudly. And as we went to different places and people would see it, not many people asked, but there was a few people we came in contact with, not only on our land tour, but in our cruise, and they asked me about it, and I, of course, want to know about the SAR? How much time you got? And I was interested to the reaction that I got from Europeans wanting to know about an organization as young as we are, celebrating our young freedom, when they learn in their history going back to BC, because we visited the Acropolis and Colosseum and a few other places. But yet they wanted to know, how strong why is it we felt so strong about it? And I said, well, because it was the first. We were the one that was really, in the New World, we were it. And it was interesting to get some comments from the Europeans about what we do over here, so much about that. I did, at Tom's request, I did what a lot of us do. I read the Minuteman, and in short order, you'll see a bunch of pictures about how the Minuteman travels. And by the way, Mike Pedritas, I did try and straighten the Tower of Pisa. Didn't work. Anyhow, there's a number of pictures that we'll have in the future, we don't have it today, of where the Minuteman went, and you'll be amazed where the Minuteman showed up. It was all over Europe. Okay, as you can tell, Mark is not here today. Unfortunately, Mark ran into 2 engagements, November and December, so he's not even going to be here for the next meeting, but he worked with Mike Pedritas, and he had talked with Brent about their presentations today, and I thank Mark in absentia for that. And next month, we are going to have a visit from the jolly old elf himself. Is that correct, Mr. Whitelock? Okay. Dan Reed from our sister chapter is going to make a presentation to us. And any news from the second vice president for the good of the cause? Outside of you're also being the sergeant at arms and working with me on that, and I appreciate that. Secretary, the minutes, sir. I think everyone has seen them, right?
They've been handed out today and will be posted to the website as soon as I correct some typos. But
ask for an approval for the minutes.
Approval by me, anybody? Yes, Bill?
Allowed in their entirety.
Not often participants should make that kind of a motion. No, I don't think we'll do that, but all in favor, say aye. All opposed, say no. No. Noes have it. Okay. It's the power of the microphone, Bill. Okay, let's see where we are. Mr. Treasurer, would you please join me? So what should I do? What should I do?
Just go with the one that I told you.
Okay, I don't have it with me.
Oh, basically, exception.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Did everybody get a copy of the income statement? They did. Okay, if you will turn to the back of that, you will see the proposed 2020 budget for the coming year. Take a look at that. We probably will not vote on it today, but we wanted to give you a month's lead time to go through, cuss and discuss, ask questions, and possibly at next month we'll be able to approve it. So we'll have an approved budget in effect for the start of 2020. Any immediate questions right now? Good, I thank you very much.
Now, that's what I call a good committee report. Thank you, Nick. Okay, Mr. Registrar, sir, for the good of the cause.
Are you going to assist?
Yeah.
We have with us today to swear in or induct into our organization Mark Douglas Foster. And the process is that we will go through the ceremony, and at the end of it, we'll give him a chance to tell us a little bit about his patriot. So,
Okay. All right, Mark, would you raise your right hand, please? Having been accepted as a member of the Dallas chapter of the Texas Society of the Sons of the American Revolution, do you, as a descendant of one of the patriots and heroes of the American Revolution, reaffirm your ancestors' faith in the principles of liberty and our constitutional republic?
I do.
And will you pledge to support the patriotic, historical, educational objectives of the National Society, Sons of the American Revolution?
I will.
I now take pleasure in presenting you your membership certificate. And I understand that without other people in the family here, that Mr. Pinkerton is going to give you the rosette.
and you right here. This rosette is the buff and blue, which are the SAR colors, and they're the colors of the uniform of General George Washington. Congratulations.
Thank you, Jim.
The Patriot, we welcome you to the Dallas chapter. We ask that you work with us to fulfill the purposes and objectives of the Sons of the American Revolution. At this time, we'd like to invite you to address our members present about your ancestor and whatever thoughts you may have about him.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mark Foster. A little bit about my family first before I was a Patriot. I have 4 children. I had 3 daughters and a son who's 15, and he goes to Jesuit right down the street. I live at Forest and Inwood. And he and his mom had to go to a golf event out of town today, so they weren't able to meet me here today. But my father, who's 91 years old, lives in Oak Cliff, and that's where I grew up, in Oak Cliff. He was born in 1928, and he couldn't make it here either. He doesn't get out of his house these days. But he's also a member of the Sons of American Revolution, and so that's part of the reason, I got interested in it, the organization. And he grew up in Haskell, Texas. Haskell's about 60 miles north of Abilene, and so he lived there, and he moved here. And I have 4 brothers and sisters, and we all grew up in Oak Cliff. And so my father, Arthur Foster, he grew up there. His father, Arthur Foster, born in about 1896, was also in Haskell County, and then his father, Arthur Foster, was also in Haskell County, and that was in the about 1860s. Several years ago, 15-something years ago, my dad asked me to essentially buy the inheritance that I was going to be getting from him of a lot of farmland that he had in Haskell County. And so when I got those deed records, my family actually got the land originally from the state of Texas. My original great-grandfather had gotten that land, and so it was pretty interesting because I'd lived in 4 houses in 10 years here in Dallas, and so I was like somebody that actually has a long history of staying in the same place was a little bit unusual for me. But anyway, back to my Patriot. Before the state of Texas, I did a little bit of research on it, and it tracks back to Colonel John Foster. And Colonel John Foster was actually born in 1760, and he fought in the Revolutionary War. But his father, who was born in 1732, they were from Southampton, Virginia, the southeast portion of Virginia, and they lived there. And so his father, who was in his early 40s, they were in the militia in Virginia. He was a lieutenant in the militia. But there's a lot written about Colonel John Foster. He wasn't a colonel in the actual Revolutionary War. He got to be a colonel rank after he fought in the Indian Wars after the Revolutionary War. And so I was thinking I was going to come here and tell you about the battles that he was in, and I was going to research those battles. But what ended up happening is they fought in some battles together, and John and his brother James were on a boat, and a British warship came early in the conflict, and they were captured, and they were taken by ship to Bermuda, and they stayed for a couple of years in Bermuda, I guess, until there was a prisoner exchange towards the end of the war, and they brought him back, and he got back and met his father, Arthur Foster, at the Battle of Yorktown when he got back. And so I can't tell you much about what he did because he spent his time in the prisoner of war camp that they had back in that period of time. So that's it.
Thank you for that. I've already gone over with him that we're giving him this challenge coin, and you might explain a little bit for him what a challenge coin is.
As the story goes, during World War I, there was a group of pilots that had a lot of camaraderie because they were losing a lot of their compatriots as they went out to fight. So they put together a little group of people, and they had these coins minted, and they put them in a brown sack around their neck, and they flew off to fly over Germany. One of them was shot down and captured by the Germans, and somehow was repatriated over into the French. Now the French didn't speak English and vice versa, but the only thing they recognized was this little pouch, and when they saw it and saw the coin, they realized who they had, and the French brought him back to the United States lines, and he was repatriated and became a veteran of the World War I. Since that time, challenge coins have been issued throughout the military and other services all over the world, and this is one for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
And by the way, you want to carry it. Because if you're ever out with Pinkerton or Whitelock or one of these guys around here that have these, and you're sitting and having an adult beverage, and somebody puts the coin on the table, if you don't have your coin, you're buying. Don't laugh, you're next.
I'll remember that.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Very good. Thanks. Mr. Pinkerton? I'm going to let you make that.
Yeah. Just a little bit more from what's been going on in registrar land. Today we inducted, as you see, Mark, we have 4 more members that have been approved that we will be inducting at some future time. Travis Allison, John Labadowski, and 2 sons, Jacob Bontress and Joel Bontress. Also, at this time, we have 2 applications pending at National, and just recently, we have completed 4 applications that are going to Jerry Brown, and I have 4 more that will be ready very soon. So we are growing.
Very much so. Thank you. The job of registrar never ends, you know? Or as Jerry Brown told me a long time ago when I first met him, you know, the president of the chapter works from sun to sun, but the registrar's work is never done. I'll tell you, with that little report and what I've talked about earlier and what we're trying to do in developing our training or information video that we're working on with Marshall Scanlon, who's not here today, and the rest of the advisory council with Bill and Tom. This will bring us up to close to 70 new members. When this is all done, we'll be at about 70 new members in 3 years. But we got to get the people to our meeting. We need to see the new faces because we've got a lot of work to be done. We want the new folks to get involved with some committee or co-committee chairman work. Some of it is very, you know, you work for a couple weeks in a month and then you're done for the rest of the year. We have some people who have continued to do it long and long. John Morton, I support you because of what you've done with the poster contest. Don't stop because I know where you live, okay? Anyhow, I thank you for your work, Jerry, and of course, supported by Jerry Brown. Okay. See if I missed anybody. We don't have any news about the membership chairman, do we?
No, nothing on now, but in light of what you discussed, you might point out the form that was issued by the state.
Perfect. The form that you may see on the table that looks like this would be a big help to the chapter and to the state. It's fairly self-explanatory. Some of it is, gee, I'd be interested, but the rest of it is pretty much pertinent information about yourself and your compatriot. We're finding that we may have had a few holes in our process when it comes to historical data. This is going to help us. It also might help you just as a memory jogger. If you could fill that out and get it back to us, this was delivered to us by John Anderson out of the Arlington chapter because he is the state historian, and he and I and Tom visited the State Historical Archives up at North Texas, and they're kind of behind this because they want to get everything up to snuff and up to speed. This is different than the membership thing that came out a couple of years ago about where you could subscribe and get a book with your picture and that kind of stuff. That was done by the National. This is state. This is what we want. This is our stuff, okay? So please, if you can fill that out, because at the same time, I'm reminding people that all the activities that you've had this year on behalf of the chapter, contributions, work with the veterans, visits, that kind of stuff, please jot them down because I'm very, very close to beginning the annual report phase for our chapter for this year, and I really need those incidents of involvement that you have. Tom's been good at it. Our treasurer's been good at it. My fellow there at the color guard has been good at it, and I thank you for all of the notes, because we do need to get that recorded. Okay, sir.
I believe if you pay your dues online, that form is also available online to fill out.
Now, I did not know that. Good piece of information. If you're paying the dues, which those notices came out while I was out of town, by the way, if you're paying it online, this form is online, so you might be able to fill it out online if you want. Right at the bottom. Perfect. Good, good. Thank you. Good job, Gary. Appreciate it. For the color guard, Mr. Robert, would you like to talk a little bit about the upcoming events? Yes.
SAR is going to have the Veterans Day Parade, or be involved in it Monday, weather pending. As y'all have heard on the news, Monday is supposed to have all the elements of weather. Winds up to 35 miles an hour, and the cold front comes in, rain. So that's always, it was a problem last year. And all the good days we've had, and the good days past Monday, old man weather fixed Monday. So there'll be probably an announcement Sunday, probably on Monday. So anyway, we're in the 75 position. There are like 140 plus events, 143 units. But we're number 75. So anyway, we're supposed to have a trailer for Ted Wilson, and who's the commander of the Texas Coast Guard. So, and we're depending upon all the chapters. I have emailed chapter members to please be at this parade. It's 9 o'clock Monday morning, and we'll be meeting at that parking lot close to the old reunion tower, the heat reunion tower. So that's basically it.
All right.
We'll see how it comes.
Thank you, Robert, for keeping us current. By the way, again, another yes, always for that man.
Just to clarify a little bit, we meet at 9 o'clock. The parade actually starts at 11:15.
That's right, it starts at 11. Something like that, 11.
Yeah.
11:15, it said.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Rose Bowl parade. You got to get everything.
Fire? Huh?
Yeah.
Gonna have a fire? No fire.
No fire. Yes, Robert.
And you brought up the weather. As we know of any members that were impacted by the tornado, other than maybe power being out for a few minutes. But,
Great question. Does anybody know of any of our chapter or any other chapter members that may have been impacted by the most recent tornadoes? Good question. Thank you, Robert. Okay. For the cause, again, for those of you who need to be reminded, in the middle of that of our schedule here, it shows the Texas.org Dallas, our chapter website, which has been increased in value tremendously, again, by the help from John Anderson from the Arlington chapter. He's done a yeoman's duty for us. And the YouTube channel, which was, engineered and fostered and promoted by our historian, the SAR Dallas chapter. Don't forget to go on YouTube if you want to see this. You will get notified through the mail and you'll be able to see yourself get involved. So if you want to show it to your family, it's on YouTube. Okay, old business. Is there anything that we need to discuss in old business? Tom Smith, you had, was there something that you wanted to talk about with the budget at all?
We had discussed $1,000 from the Minuteman Fund to the operating account. And I will take care of that. I really wanted this to go into the minutes so that we have record of that transfer.
Yes. Tom Smith, obviously, one of the persons that journals our Minuteman Fund and also the Freedom Fund. He is also one of our senior consultants that we use on our advisory council, along with Bill and Marshall Scanlon. We had talked about the fact that we are promoting the January meeting, January 14th, Tuesday night, not here. It's going to be at the Crown Plaza Hotel right off of Midway. And again, January 14th, it will be husband and wife or husband and guest or guest and guest. And to be able to pull that off, go off-site at night and have a meeting, we had to supplement the cost a little bit. And Tom very nicely said that we could take $1,000 from the Minuteman Fund and move it into the appropriations fund for that meeting. Now, there'll be a charge of $35 a plate for this. We've actually been through the menu, we've been through all the meeting stuff for a couple months now, with the help of Nick and his wife. And we're going to go test the meal, but we've selected the menu, but I think it's going to be a great job. It's basically going to be a January meeting that will be the celebration of our 90th anniversary, which we talked about when we had our July deal. And it's also going to be the installation of new officers. While I'm on that, with the movement of that money, that will help supplement the cost. We also have had, by the way, since you and I talked, we've had $600 in donations. So we're offsetting some of the movement of the money by that, plus the fact we've made money on the cups that we sold, and so that's going to offset a little bit. And then again, when we get into doing the challenge coin next year, we'll have more revenue coming in. And I also discovered this morning, with a great discussion from Jerry Brown, there had been a blip in the amount of money that we have or haven't received from the state for new members. We hadn't gotten it. Guess what? We got revenue coming. How much did you figure?
I think about $600.
About $600 in revenue that we hadn't accounted for that we're going to get. It just somehow, with the change of officership at the state level, somebody wasn't talking to somebody and we didn't get the money. But that's going to be cleared up within the next 3 weeks. So again, I think we're going to be in good shape. Okay. Yes, sir.
The January meeting, attire.
January meeting will be coat and tie. And then appropriate for women, for whatever that would be appropriate. I guess evening dress or whatever, not evening dress, but, dress. And again, those invitations are going to go out in December. And it will be almost first come, first serve, because we've only got 40 to 48 slots. So, yes, sir.
I believe that the discussion for the withdrawal from the Minuteman was discussed, but hadn't yet been voted on.
Oh,
Doesn't have to be. But we would, if you want to vote.
Well, why our Constitution ain't in the essence.
Okay. Richie Fund, yes.
Oh, you're right.
Richie Fund, yes, Minuteman. Okay, good. Well, that solved that. Thank you, Tom.
And I'm not sure we're going to need it at this point, the way things seem to be coming together, but we're still.
Yeah. And that's fine. And I thank you for your cooperation on that. By the way, for that, you may have seen this in a piece of correspondence that Tom put out earlier. With all we've got going on in our chapter right now, I have requested a meeting and have taken a meeting with our current officers. And I've convinced them that for continuity of purpose, that we need to stand as officers for next year. Obviously, that'll have to be approved. We will have some in absentia. Our historian will no longer be serving in that capacity, although I'm sure he'll help our chapter in other ways. Tom Whitelock, who's done every job except laundry, is finally going to take a break from being the secretary, and we don't have anybody to type minutes yet, but we're working on that. And my good friend Alan Prather will not be the second VP any longer, but he has committed that he will help me as the Sergeant of Arms doing these kind of duties and greeting and so forth. So the slate of officers that you may have seen earlier will be pretty much the same that you had this year. We will continue our projects into next year and then hopefully get us set up for a great 2021. The reason I say that is because there'll be a vote on this at our December meeting. Is that right, Tom? Okay. New business. Any other new business? Yes, sir.
I think the oratory contest has a state deadline, end of January.
It's January 15th, and it's December 31st, and it's a good point.
So if you have any context, I had good relationships with the junior high in Richardson. There's two of them there, and maybe it's a good time just to refresh their memory. Their emails will be basically approach the guidance counselors, and they're the focal point for getting it out to the classes.
Did everybody get that? We're talking about the oration contest, one of our youth contests. What you do is you're contacting local schools and you're getting a hold of the guidance counselors and finding out the people that might stand and deliver. Then they get a copy of the rules and regulations for being entered into the oration contest chapter and then eventually state. And as you know, we've had people out of this chapter win that. Yes, sir.
Mike mentioned that it's just alerted to the fact that the next state chairman for oration contest possibly is Mark Harris.
You got it right. Mark went with me to the most recent BOM, and Mark got enthused and involved, which is one of the things we want new people to get involved with. And Mark not only next year will serve as his current capacity as program chairman, first vice president, but he's going to be somewhere in the state hierarchy of the oration people because he really took to that. We'll know more about that when Mark gets back. Okay, if there's no other new business.
Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Just one other item. I was at a military order of world wars luncheon the other day, and one of the DAR chapters in our area is teaming with them to do wreaths across America, where they are laying wreaths on tombstones. It might be something that we get involved with a sister DAR chapter as well.
Well, and we are very well versed in that. Thank you, Mike. Versed in that. As a matter of fact, at the last meeting, I anointed Mr. Whitelock with a certificate for his activity with Wreaths Across America, and we're in the middle of that process right now. So I thank you. Good comment. Well, I think we've... Yes, sir.
What's the address for the YouTube?
For YouTube?
That would be in this newsletter.
Once you go to our website, come down on the news tab, it says YouTube channel. If you go directly to YouTube, look in SAR chapter, SAR Dallas chapter, and in the search section. And I thought I had that in there.
Yeah, you do. You've got it. It's in the middle of the schedule, not the meetings. Look at your schedule for today, and it's right in the middle.
Right in the center, it says chapter website and the YouTube channel for the church.
We'll work with you, Jerry. We'll work with you, really. Okay.
Because the musicians are excellent.
Yes, exactly.
Next month's newsletter will have it in Braille.
Actually, Jerry, we're going to drive a copy of it to your house, just, for your...
Could you make it loudspeakers?
Goodness. I can't wait for the January dinner. I want to talk to your wife again. Yeah, she's great. All right, with that, Mr. Nick, do we have anything from Bradley Sue?
Before I ask Bradley Sue in here, I was going to comment that Wreaths Across America in past years has been a big project of children of the American Revolution. Bradley Sue, come up and tell us. I don't know if that's true this fall or not. I think she's wagging her head yes.
Before I get to December, tomorrow we're meeting at the Dallas Hall of State. We're studying Texas this year. That's one of the things that's historical that we're working on. So we'll be meeting tomorrow. But I wanted to say that while the ladies were working at the house during the fair, they got into the old CAR notebooks and records. And everyone's always asked us who David Pendleton was. You know, that's the name of our chapter. And everyone said, well, he must have been someone, you know. Well, finally they found out he's a 12-year-old boy that helped his father, who was a Navy captain during the Revolutionary War. They had a ship, and they were being chased by the British. And he knew all the little rivers and coves in their area, and so they were able to pull their ship in and hide it, and the British went on by, and so that's our David Pendleton. And the other thing is that David Pendleton chapter will be 100 years old this year. We're going to be celebrating at the George Washington Tea in February 1920. Yes. And we're doing Wreaths Across America. Many years we've gone out to the National Cemetery, but one of the DAR chapters in McKinney wanted to do McKinney. So last year some of them went up to McKinney, but then we found that they were doing it at Allen. Well, as it happens, this is where all my relatives are buried, and I have about 5 people that have been in the service there. So I think we're going to the Allen Cemetery for Wreaths Across America in December.
Perfect.
So,
Great. Thank you, Bradley Sue. One of the things that we found out this morning is Jack Carpenter, who had to leave early, when he joins our transfers to our chapter, he's going to become our DAR liaison person. So it's going to work out very well. It's time, sir. Oh, you have one more. Okay.
With that lead in about CAR, did you guys pick up on that? David Pendleton is 100 years old this year. We're just hitting our 90th birthday. They've been here 10 years before there was an SAR chapter. Anyway, along that line, with our dinner coming up in January, the band that's going to be playing is the Dave Tanner Band. You may hear him. He owns a radio station, WBAP in Fort Worth. He also has a radio. He has the radio station. He plays around for a variety of functions around town, and also plays Wednesday nights at Ruggieri's Italian Restaurant at Preston and Royal Lane, which is southwest corner, not the one that was devastated. Just wanted to put that in. When I was talking to him about booking him for the night, I mentioned SAR. I've known him from other functions that I've been in. And he says, oh yeah, he says, I grew up as a kid in the David Pendleton chapter of CAR. And I said, are you an SAR member? Well, no, I haven't quite gotten around to that. So those of you who show up that night, Mr. President,
yes, sir,
and a few handful of others in there, put a touch on Dave Tanner and see if we can't sign him up. Thank you.
I like that.
Okay.
Who says you can't recruit, huh?
You never know when it's going to come out.
Yes, sir, Bob.
You will also be playing tonight The Greek Isles where he plays on Friday night and then the Jerry, those are both devastated. But he's going to be at Greek Isles in Plano tonight.
Oh, really?
6:30.
Okay.
Did everybody get that? Did everybody hear that?
I thought the southwest quadrant.
Bob just said that the same guy that we're having at our January meeting is playing at tonight,
Greek
Greek
Isles,
Isles in
Plano.
Plano.
Greek Isles in Plano.
15th
6:30 to
Street.
9:30. And you can look him up on the website. No, those two restaurants, the Greek Isles right behind, which we played on Friday nights, are both temporary fences around, they're devastated.
Oh,
So they're
wow.
both closed.
From the tornado, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. Okay, get your tickets out. How about 499? Right here. There you go, right off the box. How about 485? All right, Mark. Oh, 484. No 484. Okay. Wow, these are all in a row. I don't mean to do that. 498. Right here. There's something on the back table for you. Go pick.
Shake them up again, they're all.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. How many more we got? 5, okay. How about 504? Oh, no. How about 508? All right, Malcolm. 5. $5.10.
Bingo.
All right. You want, and I see why you want me to shake them up.
That's why I wanted to shake it.
One more? Nick? One more? 2 more, okay. 487. Well, that should be all of them. Okay. All right, with that, Mr. Chancellor, could I call upon you for everybody to stand and have Tracy give us a benediction?
Beloved Father God, thank you for the blessings you've given us personally and to our great nation. Send us forth into the world to do your work and to continue spreading the good word about our beloved country, the United States of America. Amen.
Amen. And please stand and follow me in the recessional. Until we meet again, let us remember our obligations to our forefathers who gave us our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, an independent Supreme Court, and a nation of free men. All right. We are adjourned.